10 tips to transform your Monstera plant from calm and slow to indoor jungle. Hello, beautiful growers. Welcome back to Earthly Delights, the sanctuary for every heart that finds peace in green leaves and quiet growth. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at your Monstera and whispered, "Why aren't you growing like the ones online?" You gave it water, you gave it love, but somehow the leaves stay small, solid, and stubbornly hole-free. If that's you, you're not alone. You might be someone living in a cozy apartment with just one window and a busy life that doesn't always allow time to decode plant puzzles. Or maybe you're a dedicated plant lover who's tried everything, but your Monstera still looks like it's stuck in survival mode. Whether you're new to houseplants or years into your green journey, this story is yours. Today, I'm going to share secrets I wish someone told me 5 years ago. Secrets that will breathe life back into your Monstera and transform your plant space, no matter where you live or how much light you have. So grab a warm drink, settle in, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our growing family here on Earthly Delights, where every leaf tells a story. 1. Light isn't optional, it's language. If your Monstera could speak, the first thing it would probably say is, "I need more light, not more water, not a new pot, just more sky." Light is not just a source of energy, it's a conversation. It's how your plant reads the world, sets its rhythm, and decides whether it's safe to grow or better to hold back. And if the gaps between your Monstera's leaves are longer than the width of your hand, it's not lazy, it's stretching, searching for the sun. I used to have one sitting 2 meters from a bedroom window, thinking it was enough. But the truth was written all over its stems, long, leggy, and lifeless. No splits, no drama, just dull green silence. Then I moved another Monstera closer to a bright window with filtered afternoon light. Within weeks, it started putting out leaves with deep, dramatic fenestrations, as if it finally had something to say. Here's the key. Monsteras don't just want light, they need meaningful light. Direct sunlight can work wonders if you ease them into it. Don't shock them by going from shade to full blast overnight. Think of it like training for a marathon, a little more each week, a slow, gentle awakening. So the next time you're wondering why your Monstera looks stuck, don't ask what's wrong with it. Ask what it sees, and if it's seeing enough sky to grow into its wild, natural self. Ready for a game-changing hack if your home just doesn't get enough light? That's coming up next. 2. Grow light hacks for gloomy homes. Not all of us are blessed with floor-to-ceiling windows or golden afternoon light pouring in. Maybe your apartment faces north, or maybe tall buildings block your view of the sky. If that's your reality, don't worry. You're not failing your plant. You just need to get creative. When I first realized my home barely got 4 hours of light on a good day, I thought my indoor jungle dreams were over. But then, I discovered the power of grow lights, and not the industrial, cold-toned kind that makes your living room feel like a science lab. I'm talking warm-spectrum lights that mimic the sun, give your Monstera what it craves, and still let your space feel cozy. One of my favorite tricks? A clip-on grow light with a timer. I set it for 12 hours a day, mimicking the daylight patterns of a tropical forest, and suddenly my Monstera started to wake up. New leaves, brighter color, a little stretch in the stem like it was reaching for a long-lost friend. You don't need to flood your space with gear. Just one well-placed grow light, positioned a foot or two above the plant, can make a world of difference. And if you're short on outlets or shelf space, try a light ladder, a simple DIY setup using wall hooks and a cheap adjustable lamp. In low-light homes, we can't change the weather, but we can change the story our plants are living in. Up next, we'll talk about one of the most misunderstood features of the Monstera, those wild, wiry roots that seem to grow out of nowhere. 3. Don't fear the roots. Use them. Let's talk about those strange, twisting roots that seem to burst from the stems of your Monstera like wild antennae. You've probably looked at them and wondered, should I cut them? Tuck them away? Are they even supposed to be there? Here's the truth. Aerial roots are not a flaw. They're your plant's way of adapting, of anchoring itself to something stable, just like it would in the jungle as it climbs trees toward the light. They're not just roots, they're lifelines. I used to snip them off, thinking they looked messy or out of place, But once, after a wind gust knocked over my Monstera, I realized those roots could have saved it. That was my turning point. Now I guide those aerial roots straight into the soil, or better yet, into a moss pole. It's like giving the plant a second spine, more strength to grow tall without toppling over. And here's a little tip. If your Monstera always feels wobbly in its pot, this is your sign. Let those roots work for you. Moist soil or sphagnum moss around the base can invite them to dig in, take hold, and steady the whole structure. The result? A plant that doesn't just look stronger, but is stronger. And that stability? It frees up energy for growth, bigger leaves, and yes, those beautiful fenestrations. Next, we'll unravel the truth about pots, because it turns out being a little root-bound isn't always a bad thing. Stay with me. 4. The truth about repotting and why you might be harming your plant. Here's a confession I wish someone had pulled me aside to whisper years ago. Not every plant wants to be repotted the moment you bring it home. I get it. We want to give our plants a fresh start. New soil, new pot, new energy, right? But for Monsteras, constant repotting can feel more like a root eviction than a loving upgrade. Monsteras are surprisingly tolerant of snug quarters. In fact, they often thrive when their roots are a little crowded. That compact environment signals stability, safety, and in the wild they'd be clinging tightly to a tree or rock anyway, so a roomy pot full of fluffy soil can actually feel unsettling. I learned this the hard way. I once moved my Monstera to a larger pot with the best intentions, and it stalled. For weeks, no new growth, just droopy, confused leaves. Turns out, I had given it too much too soon. What it needed was time, not space. So how do you know when repotting is truly necessary? Listen for signs. Roots spilling from drainage holes, water draining too fast, soil turning hydrophobic or crusty. Those are whispers your plant actually wants a new home. But if everything seems fine, let it be. Sometimes staying put is the most nurturing thing you can offer. In the next part, we'll go beneath the surface, literally, and talk about the oxygen your roots are begging for. And trust me, it's more important than water. 5. Your soil could be suffocating your Monstera. You've watered it, you've fed it, but somehow your Monstera still looks like it's holding its breath. That's because it might be, quite literally, starving for air. We often talk about watering schedules, but what rarely gets enough attention is this. Your plant's roots need oxygen just as much as they need water. Without airflow around the roots, your Monstera starts to suffocate. And that suffocation? It doesn't come with warning sirens. It sneaks in slowly, through soggy soil, poor drainage, or a mix that holds too much moisture for too long. I once thought I was doing everything right, but the leaves started yellowing, and I couldn't figure out why. When I pulled the plant from the pot, the truth was clear. Dark, mushy roots gasping for space in compacted soil. That's when I switched to a mix that changed everything. Now I keep it simple. 5 parts rich compost for nutrients and water retention, 2 parts perlite for breathability, and 1 part orchid bark for structure. The difference? Night and day. Suddenly my Monstera wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. So next time you think your plant needs more love in the form of water, pause. What it might really be craving is room to breathe. Coming up, we'll explore how to water your Monstera in a way that listens rather than follows a rule book. Because watering, as you'll soon see, isn't just a task, it's a relationship. 6. Watering isn't a schedule, it's a conversation. Let's be honest, how many times have you stood over your Monstera with a watering can, thinking, is it time? Am I doing this right? Maybe you follow a routine, every Sunday or every third day. But here's the truth that changed everything for me. Your plant doesn't follow your calendar, it speaks its own language. Watering isn't about routine, it's about observation. It's about learning to read the subtle signs, like drooping leaves with dry edges, or a pot that feels feather light when you lift it. These aren't accidents, they're messages. I used to drown my Monstera in kindness, thinking more water meant more love, but all it did was slowly choke the roots and invite rot. Then I discovered a better way, the way method. I'd lift the pot when it was freshly watered and remember how heavy it felt. Days later, I'd lift it again. If it felt like lifting a dry sponge, it was time. Simple, clear, no guessing. Moisture meters can help at first, especially if you're just learning, but in time, your instincts will sharpen. You'll touch the soil, feel its texture, see the leaves, and just know. So instead of sticking to fixed days, start asking questions. How are you feeling today, my green friend? Are you thirsty or just cool and content? That shift in mindset, it's what turns a plant owner into a plant whisperer. And speaking of instincts, what about pruning? Should you cut your Monstera back to make it fuller? Not so fast. What you don't cut might just be the key to your most dramatic growth yet. Let's get into that next. 7. Why you shouldn't always prune Monsteras. We've all been tempted. You look at a long, wandering Monstera vine and think, if I just cut it back, maybe it'll grow bushier, fuller, faster. That instinct makes sense, especially if you've had success pruning pothos or other trailing plants. But here's where Monsteras are different, and where well-meaning snips can set you back months. Monsteras don't follow the same cut and multiply rule. When you prune a mature stem that's been producing those glorious fenestrated leaves, the ones with the dramatic splits and holes, you risk sending the plant back to square one. Why? Because the new growth often reverts to juvenile form. That means small, solid leaves without a single slit in sight. It happened to me once after a hasty trim. I thought I was shaping the plant for a cleaner look, but the next 2 leaves, completely plain, no personality. It took weeks of coaxing with light and patience before the mature look returned. Now I prune with purpose, only if there's disease, damage, or a desperate need for reshaping. Otherwise, I let the Monstera age naturally. The older it gets, the more dramatic its leaves become. Like a fine wine, it gets better with time. So before you reach for those scissors, pause. Let your Monstera express its age, its journey, its story. And if you're still wondering why your leaves aren't splitting, well, it might not be your care at all. It might be the type of Monstera you've brought home. Curious? Let's uncover the truth next. 8. 2 Monsteras, 1 mistake. Do you even know which one you have? Here's a little plant world twist that surprises even seasoned growers. Not all Monsteras are created equal. In fact, the one sitting in your living room, yes, that gorgeous green beast, might not be the Monstera you think it is. You see, there are 2 main types often sold under the same name, Monstera deliciosa and Monstera borsigiana. At first glance, they look almost identical, but their growth habits, leaf size, and even the number of fenestrations, completely different stories. Most people, myself included, assume they've got a deliciosa, the showstopper with massive, deeply split leaves that stretch out like jungle fans. But unless you went to a specialty nursery or paid a little extra, chances are you've got a borsigiana. It's more compact, more common, and maxes out at smaller leaf sizes, usually under 50 centimeters. I remember caring for my plant obsessively, waiting for those iconic splits to appear, but they never came. It wasn't my lighting, it wasn't my soil, it was just genetics. The plant was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It just wasn't the variety I thought I had. This isn't a bad thing. Borsigiana is still beautiful, still lush, still full of personality. But if you've been holding your breath for 3-foot-wide leaves, it's better to know the truth. Because when you know what you're growing, you stop chasing unrealistic expectations and start celebrating your plant for what it is, not what it isn't. Coming up next, a myth-busting finale about a common plant care mistake people make the minute they get their Monstera home and why it might be doing more harm than good. 9. Beginner myth. Don't rush to repot right after buying. So you've brought home a beautiful new Monstera. It's sitting proudly on your windowsill in that crinkly plastic nursery pot. And your first instinct? Repot it immediately. After all, that soil must be old, right? Maybe cheap, maybe wrong. You want to give your new leafy friend the best start. But here's the surprising truth. Repotting right away might be the worst thing you can do. When a Monstera is moved to a new environment, your home, your lighting, your humidity, it goes through what I call green shock. It's adjusting, listening, trying to figure out what just happened. And if on top of that, you disturb its roots, shake off the soil, and shove it into a whole new setup, well, it's like moving house and changing jobs on the same day. I made that mistake once. The plant didn't die, but it stopped growing for over 2 months. It just sat there, silent, still a little stunned, and I realized sometimes love means leaving things alone. Most growers actually use decent potting mixes. They're not perfect, but they're good enough to support the plant through this adjustment phase. So unless you see clear signs of distress, mold, foul smells, roots rotting or circling excessively, leave your Monstera in its original pot for a few weeks. Let it settle. Let it trust you. Then, when it's ready, you'll know. And that repotting? It'll feel like an upgrade, not an uprooting. In our final chapter, we'll zoom out and talk about the deeper growth happening, not just in the plant, but in you. Stay with me, green soul. You're almost there. 10. Growing beyond the leaves, the inner growth you didn't expect. Somewhere along the journey, between adjusting light, learning when to water, and resisting the urge to prune, we start to realize something surprising. This isn't just about the plant anymore. It's about us. Because caring for a Monstera, or any houseplant really, teaches you to slow down, to observe instead of react, to wait instead of rush. It asks you to trust that growth is happening, even when you can't see it yet. I've had days where everything felt like too much, but then I'd glance over at my Monstera, quietly unfurling a new leaf, and it reminded me that change doesn't need noise. It just needs time, intention, and care. You, my friend, have already grown in ways you might not even notice. You've learned to listen to silence, to respond with patience, to accept that some progress looks like stillness. That's not just plant wisdom, that's life wisdom. So the next time someone says it's just a plant, smile, because you know better. That Monstera in your living room, it's a mirror. It's showing you your resilience, your intuition, your ability to nurture something into beauty. And that is the real reward. Not just a jungle corner, but a more rooted, present version of you. Stay with me for the closing thoughts, because this is where it all comes together. Your care, your plant, your path forward. You're no longer a beginner. So here we are, at the end of the video, but truly at the beginning of something deeper. You started this journey with a Monstera that wouldn't split its leaves, that seemed quiet, confused, or stuck. But now, you understand that light isn't just brightness, it's direction. That water isn't a duty, it's dialogue. And that roots don't just drink, they breathe. You've learned that not all Monsteras grow the same way, and that's okay. You've discovered that patience, not perfection, is what brings plants to life. And you've seen that growth, real lasting growth, takes time. In them and in you. You're not just a plant owner anymore. You're a nurturer, a student of light and soil and rhythm. You know how to read between the leaves. You know when to act and when to wait. So as your Monstera unfurls its next leaf, take a moment. Breathe in that quiet victory. You're doing it. You're learning. You're growing. And if this video brought you clarity, comfort, or even a spark of curiosity, don't forget to like, leave a comment, and share your own Monstera story down below. And of course, subscribe to Earthly Delights, where we grow together, leaf by leaf, moment by moment. Until next time, keep your roots deep, your light steady, and your wonder alive.